When snow starts falling, most of us think about the cold, maybe the quiet, maybe how everything suddenly feels softer. But almost nobody looks up at the sky and thinks there's a whole invisible world moving around up there. We tend to imagine air as empty space, something we move through without noticing. But the atmosphere is crowded. Smoke from distant fires, microscopic organisms, fragments of life so small we don't even realize they're there. And this is where snowflakes become really interesting because a snowflake doesn't fall through empty air. It falls through all of that. And scientists have discovered something that sounds almost unbelievable at first. They've found DNA in snow. Now, before we go any further, I want to think about that for a second. It does not mean the snow is alive. It does not mean that the snowflakes are little creatures flying around. What it means is a lot more fascinating. Snowflakes are collectors. And as they grow and fall, they gather tiny pieces of the world around them. If we could shrink ourselves down to microscopic size and just float in the atmosphere for a moment, we wouldn't see empty space at all. We would be zipping and diving around tiny particles everywhere. Scientists call many of these aerosols. The word sounds a little complicated and strange, but it simply means tiny particles floating in the air. Dust from dry landscapes, sea salt thrown into the air by waves, plant material, bits of soil, even particles lifted thousands of miles away. NASA has actually tracked dust traveling from the Sahara Desert across the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Americas. Isn't that wild? Material lifted from one continent, crossing an ocean, and entering completely different ecosystems. The air is constantly moving things around us, and most of the time, we don't even notice. Honestly, it makes me laugh a little bit to think about how calm it can feel outside, and meanwhile, the atmosphere is busy carrying entire ecosystems overhead. Here's the part people don't realize. Snowflakes don't usually form out of nothing. Water vapor in clouds need a starting point. Scientists call these starting points ice nuclei, a tiny particle that water can freeze onto. Dust works beautifully, pollen can work too, even microscopic organic fragments. So the very first moment a snow crystal starts growing, it's already interacting with something that was floating in the air. The crystal begins tiny, a simple hexagonal structure, and as water vapor freezes onto it, the snowflake grows outward, building layer by layer. This shape reflects temperature and humidity, but the starting point, that little particle, stays at the center. So sometimes when scientists study fresh snow, they find genetic material from microscopic organisms of organic particles that were already in the atmosphere. Bacteria, fungal spores, tiny bits of plants. As snow forms and falls, it collects these particles. So instead of thinking of snow as pure frozen water, think of it as a traveler moving through a very busy environment, picking things up along the way. This has changed how I see snowfall because suddenly it feels very less isolated. A snowflake becomes part of a much larger system, not just weather, but connection. Scientists studying global dust movement have shown that airborne particles travel incredible distances. Dust from Africa helps fertilize the Amazon rainforest. Particles move between continents. Microorganisms can hitch a ride in the atmosphere, which means the snow falling outside your door might contain tiny traces of places you've never even been. It seems very magical, but it's simply the way air moves. It's kind of amazing. You're standing there watching snowfall, and some of those particles may have started their journey on the other side of the world. Researchers use DNA sequencing. That simply means they read tiny fragments of genetic material to figure out what they came from. By studying these snow samples, scientists can identify bacterial signatures, plant material, and microscopic life fragments. There's even an entire field called aerobiology that studies how biological particles travel through the atmosphere. And this isn't new or fringe science. It's part of understanding ecosystems and climate connections because the atmosphere is constantly mixing things together. Right now, even as you watch this, there are probably microscopic particles moving overhead, tiny little pieces of life. Most of it harmless, most of it invisible, and when conditions are right, snow begins forming around some of those particles, which means each snowfall is slightly different. Each storm contains a different mix of airborne history. When we think of snowflakes and look at them closely, we usually focus on the shape, symmetry, branches, geometry, but this adds another layer. Snowflakes aren't just shaped by temperature and humidity. They are interacting with an entire invisible world while they grow. They carry evidence of what was in the air. Not always, not every single crystal, but enough that scientists can learn from it. And I find that incredibly beautiful because it means snow isn't just falling, it is recording. The more I learn about snowflakes, the less simple they feel. What looks delicate is actually complex, and I truly fall in love with each one. What looks quiet is part of something constantly moving. And maybe that's why snow feels different when you really look at it, because it reminds us that the world is connected in ways that we rarely can actually see. Every snowflake starts small, forms around something invisible, grows while traveling through the atmosphere, and for just a moment, holds a tiny record of the sky. So the next time snow starts falling, remember, you're not just watching frozen water, you're watching the atmosphere tell a story. New snowflakes have arrived in the gallery. Fingers crossed for some snow this week, and we'll see you next Sunday.